Welcome to the show. Today we have a truly extraordinary guest, a woman whose life really reads like a Hollywood thriller, but is rooted in real high stakes missions. She's a former CIA officer, an expert in counterterrorism, and a powerhouse of resilience, strategy, and courage. For over a decade, she served on the front lines of national security, working undercover in some of the most complex and dangerous environments in the world. But beyond the espionage and intelligence work, she's a fierce advocate for leadership, adaptability, and the power of making bold decisions, even when the stakes are life and death. She's here to share her remarkable journey, lessons from operating in high pressure situations, and how those same principles can apply to everyday life, leadership, and business. Get ready for an amazing conversation with the incredible Michele Assad. Let's dive in. Michele, thank you so much for joining the Rise Up For You podcast. It's an honor to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Nada.
Absolutely. I'm actually very excited about this interview. So, Michele, just so you know, and anyone that's currently listening, anytime we have a guest on the podcast, it's usually because, I've seen them on social media, I've met them in person. Somehow we crossed communications, and I have high interest of bringing them on the show and having a conversation. So I'm very excited to talk with you today about your background, the work that you've done undercover. I'm giving a little sneak peek for everyone that's listening, and kind of how you got to where you are today. But before we jump into the meats and potatoes, tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am an international corporate consultant for the last 13 years. But prior to that, I was an undercover counterterrorism officer in the CIA. So I came in I started training 3 months after 9/11, spent 10 years with about 5 overseas tours in the Arab world. And again, moving around in very interesting circles as a female in the Middle East and the Arab world and in the CIA itself.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit because there's a lot there that we can break apart. So tell me, before 9/11, who was Michele, and what were you doing? What were you working towards?
Yeah, so prior to 9/11, I was trying to figure out who I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do in the world. And I had a very hard, long path trying to figure that out. Right after I graduated high school, I did a mission trip to Egypt. And that was so fascinating to me to explore this foreign culture because I'm from a really small town in Central Florida. So really humble beginnings, didn't know anything about the world. My parents were not didn't even talk about foreign affairs or politics. So I had to start at zero. So that just kind of kicked off a lifetime of learning. And that eventually led me to DC. And then I was working on my Arab studies degree at Georgetown, which back then didn't really mean anything to anyone.
No. Why Arab studies, just out of curiosity?
I think because, I had that first mission trip to Egypt. I had a couple of other trips as a student, but then I did a whole semester in Egypt as a junior.
Okay.
Yeah, so I really learned, Cairo, Egypt, started learning about the Arab world. So it was kind of a buildup, and then I kept traveling as much as possible to the Middle East because I just was fascinated by how different it was. I was fascinated by trying to understand how different it was for minorities in the Middle East and women and all of these challenging topics. So with that in mind, I just followed my sense of adventure and got this master's degree in this very strange topic.
Okay. Awesome.
And then it's so funny because I didn't know where that was leading me. But on September 11th, it became the most interesting, sought after skill set in the United States. So it was like overnight, my fortunes totally changed. I went from not being able to get a job to getting into the CIA of all places.
Yeah, right. When you get a degree in Arab studies, you don't really know what you're going to do with it.
Oh, no. So, in that sense, I can look back and I realized that I followed this gut feeling that I was just supposed to learn and prepare for what I wasn't sure. I thought this could be some sort of a government position. Maybe it's media as a journalist. Maybe it's a tank. I didn't know how it would all, how it would end up. So I always tell people you have to really listen to that that gut feeling.
I agree.
Even if you don't know where it's taking you, if you have a general sense of direction, just keep moving in that direction until you figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. And actually, that's something we talk a lot about here is that intuition. And I know that you're going to probably touch on it a number of times because where your path led you, it is a combination of rational, logical, and at the same time, intuition in the heat of the moment, right? Where like you have to make a decision within the split of a second. So how did you, I'm just curious. So from there, you went into the CIA, but how did that happen? Did someone call you? Did you apply for a job? Like what was the process?
So when I was at Georgetown, the CIA came to recruit, and they held this session like, what is it like to live an undercover life? What is it like to work for the CIA?
Yeah.
So a friend and I went to this session, and I thought, I shouldn't even be in this room. Like, there's no way I'm CIA material. Yeah. But anyway, I was just desperate for a job, so I put my resume into that pile, because back then it was a physical resume.
Yeah. Not anymore, Michelle.
I put my resumes into every single pile. Like, I wasn't choosy. I just like needed a job. So I was really surprised when like 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from an alleged CIA recruiter. And I thought, well, I don't know if this is real, but I'll keep going with it. And as you can imagine, it's a very long process. So that followed up by another phone call, that was followed up by an in-person interview, that was so many levels, and you just keep thinking to yourself, I don't know if I'm going to get through the next level of vetting, and I kept getting through it. Like, I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
So after, I don't know how long that vetting took, was maybe nearly a year, I'm in, and now I get to go through training, which of course still was a challenge because you could get culled from the program at any point during that year.
Sure. So, I'm sure there's some things that maybe you can't tell us in regards to the CIA, but I want to try to learn as much as we can without you getting in trouble. So talk to me a little bit. Okay. So you get into the CIA, and what would you say are some of before we really jump in to kind of your missions, what are some of the key things that they teach you right off the bat that you don't learn in a school, right? Like things that are not in a textbook, such as intuition that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So the things that they can't really teach you is how to listen to a gut feeling, but also how to operate in a foreign environment. Mm-hmm. So they're hoping that you're walking in the door, or they're trying to hire people who have knowledge of another culture or language, but you and I both know there's a difference between what you can read in a book and then what you learn on the streets of Cairo.
Right. Yep.
And so I had a lot of classmates who had some book knowledge, not that much, and very little time in the region. And so that's the thing that no one can teach you is in the school of hard knocks, getting on the street, interacting with people, learning how to interact well with them, because we're not in this southern part of the United States anymore, where I grew up. This is a whole different ball game. Yeah. So they can't teach you that. And also they can't teach you to have grit.
100%. It's interesting because while I'm listening to you speak, there's also the element of, being an American in a different environment overseas when things are really tense. Like, I'm Middle Eastern. I was born in America, but I'm Middle Eastern. I look Middle Eastern. But even when I go to the Middle East, they know, like, oh, you're American. Even just by the way, the jacket I wear, right? Yeah. Or like whatever I choose to wear, they're like, oh, right, exactly. Like, she's Middle Eastern, but she wasn't born here. Like, they could sniff it out.
Yes, they can. They're so good. Right. People don't understand how, like, when you talk about EI, in the Middle East, they have really high levels.
Yes, they do.
Like, the street smarts are, because it's a tough environment. And if you're going to learn how to operate in that tough environment, you've got to grow those skills.
Yes, absolutely. You're 100% correct. The emotional intelligence there, I would say certain aspects are very well developed, as you mentioned, because of the resilience and the grit and kind of like the grind that they go through on a day-to-day basis and the uncertainty of like what's going to happen tomorrow. Like, those levels help build, I would say, like a tough muscle so that they understand these different variants. So talk to us a little bit, again, as much as you can. You were in the CIA. Like, what was your first mission and what was that like? Were you scared? What happened?
I was terrified. But actually it might be better to back up, because when I got into the CIA, what was really challenging to me was my first training mentor said, "What is it you want to do here?" And I said, "Well, I want to do ops in the field." He
Yeah.
said, "What kind?" I said, "Counterterrorism." He said, "Where?" I said, "The Middle East." And he said, "No, you can't. I mean, look at you. I was in my 20s, and he's like, "You're smiley, you're friendly, you're a girl. They're never going to respect you, and you're not going to be able to do that." And I was like, "Oh, I mean, I knew the Middle East, so I know I understand the challenge that
Yeah.
you can have as females operating in those environments. I got it. I know that." But now I have someone who is so respected in the CIA telling me, "You don't have what it takes to do this job." That just guts you, because you're like, well, he must know. Like, this guy was like a living legend in the CIA. So it gutted me. So for many years in the CIA, I was not permitted to engage in on the street operations as a female.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I and these other women that came in my class, we were given like the step back. So you're supporting the men who are in those meetings with terror sources. You're supporting them. And there's a fair amount of, I mean, it was a fascinating job nonetheless. But it wasn't until my third posting, 3 years into the CIA, before I actually got to run a terror operation, like, get into the meeting with the terrorist. So it was having a lot of limitations placed on you from
Yeah.
the.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that, but kudos for you for just keep going and pushing forward. And I'm sure for you and a number of the women, I don't know, I'm sure there was a frustration there, especially because sometimes I have been in this situation where people will project things onto you when it comes to a certain culture or gender. But deep down in your gut that you can handle it. Like, you trust yourself to pivot in those moments,
Yeah,
right? I'm sure you had that feeling.
that's totally it.
Yeah.
So, when I finally got that chance to get in that room with that bad guy, I was like, hey, you know what? I've been preparing for this my whole life. I'm just going to not listen to what all the people who said I couldn't do this. And like you said, you pivot in the moment. And I just thought, I got to figure this out. Like, this guy is a mid-level insurgent. He's a scary dude. He's like, not an ideologue. He's the kind of guy that would like break people's legs to get them to fall
Yeah.
into, like to force control. And he was that guy. And I thought, I have to really work hard as a female, a young female American, and because I represent everything to him that he doesn't respect. And I got to break through that. So I had to like bring all my emotional intelligence to bear in the beginning of that meeting. And I had to greet him in Arabic, which was the first thing that shocked him. Like, of course, Americans, most Americans, we don't know other languages. Nobody walked into, Iraq knowing Arabic,
Right.
about Arabs. Then I complimented him on his work with the CIA and how I recognized that because of his bravery, we had saved dozens of lives. So I was complimenting him. So subconsciously, I was raising my position. Because
Yes.
how you've got a level. I was starting out at the ground as an American female. And as I'm speaking to him, I'm
You're
setting
bringing his guard down, right?
yes,
Slowly, like, okay, relaxing a little bit here in front of Michele.
yes. It's interesting how you can watch that body language change.
Yes.
Wait,
Yeah.
what's happening here? You're speaking Arabic. You're praising me. I like that, right? Like, everybody likes that. Everybody wants to be praised.
Yep.
And then I said something really smart about Iraq, because I was just trying to show him, like, I'm intelligent. So I said something really deeply insightful about his country. And he was like, wait a minute. Like, he's like, Ta'arif al-Iraq? Like, you understand Iraq?
Iraq, yeah.
And I said, yes, I've been studying the Middle East for a long time. And he was like, mind blown. And then in that moment, everything changed, Nada. Like, he just decided, like, I don't know who this is. She's really smart. She's cool. I'm gonna work with her. Like, I'm gonna treat her like a human being. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm going to engage with her as a professional intelligence officer. Okay, let's do this. And I was like, oh my God. I walked out of the room that day and I was like, I did it.
Congratulations. Yes, I can imagine and live through you that feeling of like, yes, got it.
And it was so great because I just realized in that moment that instead of being less than and this burden I'd carried on my shoulders as a female in the CIA for years, that I was actually really good at this job.
Yeah.
And then people started asking me to come into their source meetings to get information they wouldn't provide, that they refused to give up.
Yes.
All of these guys, they were always a big challenge, like never giving you everything. And I became the person that they turned to when they had a hard case. Like, how incredible is that I would walk into a room and 15 minutes later I'd be like, here you go, I got it. And they're like, how did you do that? I engaged with him as an actual human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Michelle, I'm curious, what was one of the scariest moments that you were in, and what did you use in order to get through it? And like, what skills did you use to get through it?
Okay, so probably the scariest. There are a lot to choose from, but in my first tour, it was a place where there was a lot of carjacking and kidnapping going on in that country. Mm-hmm. And what was happening was you would be taken as a target of opportunity by the tribesmen, sold to Al Qaeda, and then there'd be a video with your head getting cut off on the internet.
Yep.
So we had to, just say like, you can never get taken. Like, you'd rather die trying to get away than get taken. And one morning as I was driving to work by myself, my husband was traveling internationally, and I was stopped at a stoplight, and I had cars around me and, all around me, hemming me in at this light. And this man was crossing the street in front of me, looked up to the windshield and saw my uncovered face in a country where you couldn't see women's forms or faces. And he decided to self-pleasure in the middle of the street, which sounds ridiculous because it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. 9 a.m. in the morning, bright sunlight, right in the middle of the street, right in front of my car. And I was like, oh my God, are you serious right now? Now it sounds embarrassing, and it was, but what it then started turning into is a dangerous situation, because men started coming out from everywhere to see what was eliciting this behavior in the car.
You attracted attention.
Yeah, not what was wrong with him, what was wrong with me, and they wanted to see. And this is a place where everyone has an AK-47. And I suddenly realized, like, oh my goodness, I am in the process of being surrounded. And once my car is fully surrounded, then, I could be in real danger here. Like, I could get taken very quickly. By myself, I have no weapon. Everyone else has a weapon. And I had to do what the CIA taught us, which is you have to get off the X in order to save your life, the X being the site of an ambush or an attack. And I realized that this was turning into a potential ambush situation. So I just, my heart was pounding. I'm perspiring. I'm realizing, because of my EI, I can see what's gathering around me. And I know that I actually, if I don't act now, my window of opportunity is going to shrink to zero.
Yes.
And I had to use my car as a weapon, like they taught us.
Yeah. So you just bulldozed through and got out of there.
I had to hit him twice. I mean, I was ready. I didn't want to have to run him over, but I hit him the first time. He fell down. He was shocked. I was shocked that my training kicked in. I was like, whoa, what am I doing? And then I hit him a second time. And then he finally got out of the way, because I was like, if I have to run you over, I will, because I don't want to get my head cut off.
Yeah, you had to get out of the situation. So it's interesting that you said get off the X, because I know that you recently wrote a book called Get Off the X. And I'm curious how you took that, I guess, that phrase or that experience that you were taught in the CIA, and how you bring that into like real life situations when it comes to like corporate or individuals that need to get off the X in order not to sabotage themselves, not necessarily in as aggressive and extreme situations as you, but whether it's their career or personal life. Like, how does that transition? What does that mean? What does that look like in practicality for the everyday person that is listening to you?
Perfect question. So I took this counter ambush phrase that we're trained in order to survive an ambush, and I have applied it to life in general. This is a metaphor for how not to get frozen, because when you're overwhelmed, You have adrenaline, surging through your body. You have fear, you have uncertainty, like I don't know where to go, what to do, or I'm fearful of making a choice. What we do is we freeze. And so get off the X is basically a reminder not to freeze. You have to push through the freeze response. It's deeply uncomfortable to do that, but nothing meaningful ever happens in the comfort zone, as you know. In business, especially now these days, if you are not changing, if you are not keeping up with the times, if you are not embracing change, you're sitting on the X, and that's where you wither and that's where you die. So the more that you can train yourself to confront the newest circumstances, the better you are at making sure that you make the changes to your product or program or company that you need to stay on top.
Yeah. It's interesting when I'm listening to you talk, I once heard a phrase, I think it was actually a song that said that everything will change and everything must change, right? The one thing that is for sure is that change will occur. And oftentimes as human beings, we are afraid of that. And so it cripples us from being able to pivot and to be agile and to shift with the times. And I think that's why a lot of people sometimes get stuck, is because they don't recognize that the world around us is constantly evolving, which means that we ourselves have to be a constant piece of evolution, right? We have to constantly be evolving in order to continue to move forward, whether it's professionally or personally. I think it's, both in the same. The person's the professional is the person. So I love that analogy, get off the X, moving forward. Because when I think of X, I think of like a red light, right? Or like a big X in front of you that's like crippling you or preventing you from moving forward, versus like the circle of life or the green light that like helps you move forward. So I love that. Michele, this is really interesting. I do want to invite you back because I know we have a lot more to talk about, but I want to jump into the power section of the interview and ask you some rapid fire questions.
All right. Let's go.
Okay, let's do it. So we always like to ask, if you can leave the world with one final message, we call it our golden nugget. What would be your golden nugget to the world?
You are capable of so much more than you think you are.
I love that. And what's one thing that makes you cry on demand?
Oh goodness. That's such a good question. I don't even know what that is.
It's okay if you don't know.
The Notebook, the movie, The Notebook.
Why do so many people say that?
Really?
I love that. And then, here at Rise Up For You, obviously we talk a lot about emotional and social intelligence, self-confidence, being able to use these skills to really build your success. One of our favorite topics is self-confidence. So if you had to rate yourself specifically in that competency 1 through 10, 10 being absolutely amazing, your self-confidence is on par, 1 being danger zone, what would you give yourself and why?
So at this point in my life, I'd give myself probably an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
If I was in my 20s and just entering the CIA before I got into the CIA, I would say it was about a 2.
Okay.
So I have changed so dramatically as a person. I am so much more confident now. I'm a different person. And the reason was because I have always moved forward, even when I lack the confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. Well, you're taking action, right? You're moving, and you know that through time it'll build. Just out of curiosity, why'd you give yourself an 8 versus a 9?
Because there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I agree with that. This has been amazing. Thank you, Michele, for joining us. Final question for you, but first, tell us where we can find you, where we can get your book, Get Off the X. I know you're on LinkedIn as well.
Yes. So you can find all kinds of information about me, my speaking, my books, a little bit about inspiration on MicheleRigbyAssad.com. It's my 3-part name. But if you just plug in Michele and CIA, you'll find a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Fantastic. And final question for you. As you know, this is the company Rise Up For You. What comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase?
I'm not asking people to rise up for themselves, because self-actualization is very shallow and makes you full of anxiety. But if you rise up for someone else, that is what makes life worth living. And that's what gives you the fulfillment at the end of the day.
That's great. Michele, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining the Rise Up For You podcast. Every single week, we are bringing you brand new episodes with thought leaders, executives, entrepreneurs from around the world that have a sole purpose to help you be your absolute best. Thank you for joining us, and I will see you next time. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Netta.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel and check us out on social media. We are everywhere from LinkedIn to Instagram to Facebook at our simple handle at Rise Up For You. On every single platform, it's exactly the same. And we're providing new content on every single platform. So there's something different everywhere. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our podcast, and connect with us on social media. I'll see you next time.